Hello and welcome back to Zoology Live. For this session, we'll be returning to Dr. Ed Turner's pitfall traps. Here's a reminder of how he set them up, and then he'll be joining us live to share some of the things that he's been finding in his garden and to answer your mini beast questions. So do get those questions in the comments.
Hello, it's a beautiful sunny morning. I'm going to try and use the chance to show you how to set a pitfall trap, which is one of the great ways of catching insects you wouldn't normally be able to find just by searching around the surface of the ground. I'm going to apologise because it's a beautiful sunny morning. All of my neighbours are out and doing stuff in their gardens. So you're going to have drills going off, lawn mowers, people going in and out of their sheds, all this kind of stuff. But that's probably the same sort of situation as you're going to be having when you're setting these things as well. So what I use setting a pitfall trap, it sounds very grand, but all we're talking is a couple of cups set into the ground. These are what I usually use. Obviously we want to try and avoid using single-use plastic as much as possible. This is a big set of cups that I bought probably 8 or 9 years ago, and I use these quite regularly, and I like the foam ones because I think it keeps the insects nice and cool inside if I leave the traps out for a few days. So what I've got is just normal drinks cups. You can use anything really, and I've got 2 of them stacked together, and you'll see why in a sec. I've got a trowel, I've got a little bit of dead grass and moss. Moss is really good, which is going to be to keep the animals safe. I've got 3 very well used chopsticks, and I've also got just a plastic top. I've got a clear plastic top here, but you could just use any sort of plate or anything really. This is just to keep the rain off. So what we'll do is we'll start off here. Now I'm choosing the edge of the border here. And the reason is that insects, when they're moving along, will often be using these sort of features. They'll be walking along the edge. And I think if I set the trap here, I've got a better chance of catching stuff. So I'm going to go right in with a trowel, a bit like garden's world, isn't it? And I'm not just digging up the soil just sort of like that. I'm actually doing a core. So I know roughly the size of the cup. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing in, you can see this, I'm pushing in the trowel like that to basically bring out, as close as I can, a complete plug of soil. And I'm going to put that really carefully next door here. So I'm aiming to disturb the area around the trap as little as possible, and that means insects are more likely to move in. I'm going to keep on doing that until I've got a hole which is roughly big enough. You can see things moving around already actually. Big enough to hold the trap. There we go. That's big enough, I think. I'm going to put that bit there. Now I've got both the cups together, and you'll see why in a sec. So I'm going to put that cup inside that. We're only going to use the bottom one for the trap itself, but I'm going to keep them together because it means I'm going to have less soil going in. Now I've made that a bit too deep, so I'm going to put a little bit of soil back in, and then I'm going to sit that snugly so that the bottom, the top of the bottom cup sits snugly with the soil surface, or a little bit below, and that's really key. What you don't want is your cup sitting out of the soil, because if you do, you won't really catch anything. It's got like a mountain for an insect. They're not going to climb over the top to fall into your trap. It has to be sunk in. So I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to use the soil, which I put carefully to one side, to backfill. Now really I want to be doing this with as little disturbance as possible. This is all falling apart a bit. So I'm just going to move it in. And you can hear the soil going into the bottom of the trap. But you don't really want that. So it's firming it all around. It's nice and stable all around the trap. And now I can see that the bottom bit, top of the bottom cup, is completely flush, and that's really important. So now what I can do is I can put my finger on the bottom bit and pull it out, and that means the cup below is beautifully flush to the surface and it hasn't got much soil in it, so it's nice and clean. I can put the rest of the soil just back here, away from the cup, so that kind of keeps it all nice and clean. Now, the second bit of kit, which I've got around here somewhere, so I'm sitting on it, are these chopsticks and the plate, or the plastic lid, as you can see here. Now because it might rain and I don't want the things to get caught in the bottom in the water, I'm going to use this to protect it from the rain. But first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in this little plug, vegetation, nicely stuck in, and that means anything that falls in has got somewhere to sit. And I'm making sure I'm pushing it into the bottom so they can't just use the bits of straw to climb up, so they can't escape. And I'm going to use 1, 2, 3, oops, 3 chopsticks, break off there, to fix this bit of plate in place. So just like that. So hopefully you can see it's not too high, but it just means that the whole cup is now protected from any rain. So any insects, the idea is, as they're walking along the edge of my border here, they can fall into the trap, and then what I can do is I can come back tomorrow morning, probably the same time tomorrow, and see what we've caught. Now, you don't want to leave your insects in there for too long, so probably 24 hours is really good, but it means you get the whole day-night cycle, and you get a really good idea of everything that's moving around your garden. Now, I've just set one here. Of course, what you might want to do is you want to set it in different parts of your garden, because there'll be completely different insects living on the edge of this flower border compared to the middle, compared to under my hedge, compared to under the trees, or even in the middle of your lawn if you're happy to sacrifice a bit of your lawn to put in a pitfall trap. And it's well worth doing this. It will give you a really good idea of everything that's moving around in your garden when you can't see it. So have a go at setting a pitfall trap today.
And now I'm joined live by Dr. Ed Turner. Hi, Ed.
Hello, how are you, Ruth?
I'm good, thanks. We seem to have a slight delay on your video, but hopefully it will all be fine. So have you found anything this morning that you can show us?
Yeah, so I put some more pitfall traps out last night. They've not been very successful actually. So I've got a few bits in there. It was obviously just a bit too hot and I think probably a bit too dry yesterday, and for many things to be moving around. But I've got a few things from that, and also some other things I found in my garden this morning.
Okay. So we're just going to wait for your video to catch up slightly so that we can see what it is you found.
Cool. Is that any better?
Well, it's just taking it will catch up eventually. So we've had this happen a couple of times this week, but yeah, if you want to just start showing what it is you found, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, so first of all, some things which I've been finding in the pitfall traps. This is something which I think quite a lot of people might have found this week if they were looking in the pitfall traps. And this is a type of beetle, but it's quite an unusual beetle. It's called a rove beetle. And I don't know if I can show you it here. Is that, you see that?
Oh yes, yeah.
So, across a bit there.
Perfect.
So
yeah.
this is a very unusual thing for a beetle to do. Usually beetles, I've got another beetle here to show you, are kind of rounder, and they've often got these hard wing cases on their backs. This is from my rosemary. This isn't from a pitfall trap. This is a rosemary beetle, which is an invasive species in the UK. It's spread up, and lots of people have this eating their rosemary plants and eating their lavender plants. But it's a classic. I brought it in because it's a classic beetle shape. It's got a hard case all over it. You can see that. It's very round. And if I was to look at this really carefully, what I'd see is on its back, it's got a straight line running straight down its back, and that's where its two wing cases meet in a straight line. The rove beetle, there's a huge number of species, is quite different from that. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah, that's it.
It's very tricky working out which way to go with the camera. It's like sort of rubbing your tummy and patting your head at the same time.
Yeah.
But the difference is, you can see it's much longer, and it hasn't got wing cases. If I had this on my hands, it'd be crawling all over the place. And this has reduced its wing cases right down. So evolution has reduced its wing cases right down, but it can crawl really easily through the soil surface. So it's often something you find in pitfall traps. And these are very often active predators. So these are the kind of things you don't want to meet if you're another insect. In fact, sometimes if you set pitfall traps for more than just a day, like I did, you come back and find that you haven't got anything but one great big fat rove beetle in the bottom of the trap. So that's a really nice find, and it's something people can look at. Again, if you go out at night time with a torch or anything, you can sometimes see these charging around the place trying to find other insects. The other things I've got aren't insects, but I just thought I'd share them with you because again, they're things that a lot of people get in their traps. I'm going to try and turn this up. These are another group. Let's see this. What I've got here are two close relatives. So one which is scrabbling up the side trying to escape is a centipede. And the one which looks rather like a snail, curled up, is a millipede.
Yeah.
So these are two in a sort of related group, but very different life histories. So the centipede's very, very fast. It's moving around a bit like the rove beetle can. And that's because it's a predator. The way you can tell these apart is often just how fast they are, really. And centipedes have also just got one pair of legs per body segment, whereas millipedes have got two. The millipede, on the other hand, feeds on plants and decomposing plant matter and things like that. It's not active at all. You can see it's just basically, try to get the right way. Oh God, I'm so terrible at this. It basically just sort of sits there. Oh,
that's it. Yeah. That's it. It's that way.
Right. can see where my camera is, but my brain's not doing the right thing. So it's curled right up, looking like a snail. And what this is basically doing is it's just protecting itself. It's got a hard case. It's got far more legs, so 2 pairs of legs per segment. And it's also a master of chemical defences. So this will be walking around really slowly, eating plant matter, decaying material, and defending itself with often some really nasty chemicals. So it doesn't have to worry about predators very much.
Yeah.
And very, very finally, I've got. I hope to get you more of these. Actually, I didn't manage it. I've mentioned woodlice in previous posts. A lot of people have found woodlice in their traps, and I've brought you 3 of the big 5 species of woodlice to look at. So there's 5 very common species of woodlice that you get in UK gardens, and this is the first one. This is the common woodlouse.
Yeah.
So these are just basically grey. They're sort of woodlousey shape, grey with whiter underbellies. And they're very, very common. But if I turn it over, you can see the bits on the back of it, the paler bits on the back are its gills. This is basically how it breathes. So woodlice are always things that have to be in damp conditions. Another one here, which I think might have been slightly attacked by my road beetle, actually. So I can pick him up. He's not moving very much. This is a shiny woodlouse instead. Oops, I can focus.
Yeah.
Actually, you can see it is a little bit shiny, and it's got little white marks on it. Pop him back in his container. So that's the second of a big 5. It's got a much wider shape. And then the third ones I've got, you can find them. Yeah. They're rather different again. Can you see that? They're just about. They're much paler. And I don't know if you can make out. Oops, once it's fallen off. You can just about make out. They've got a little tail to the back of them, these ones, just about there. And these, if I try and turn them over a bit, you might be able to see. These are striped woodlice. So they've got a little stripe running down their back. They're much faster often than the other ones. So in the pitfall traps this morning, I got 3 of the big 5 woodlice you can find in your garden. And the other ones are the curly woodlouse, which people often really recognise. Didn't get any of those for some reason. And something called the pygmy pink woodlouse, which I did find, but it's so small, I've got no chance of showing you that. It's rather cute. It is slightly pink.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. So we've had some questions come in, and we've got some questions as well from when you were with us on Monday that we didn't get time to answer. So one that's come in today says, "Hi, Dr. Turner. What is the most fascinating spider you've caught?" From Alex Watkin Child. The most fascinating spider. Yeah.
So I'm not particularly a spider person, but my favourite group of spiders, which I used to keep when I was a kid, was jumping spiders. There's a fantastic range of jumping spiders in the UK, and I just think they're absolutely beautiful. They've got these forward-facing eyes that look a bit like car headlights, and you can keep them very easily in little containers as long as you keep them carefully. And I used to have 2 or 3 different species, including there's actually more than one species. They're called zebra spiders. Those wonderful ones you sometimes get on the front of your house in summertime. They like really warm conditions, and you can keep them really easily, and you can feed them flies and things like that. And I think they're just a lovely group of spiders.
Yeah, I think they're really cute actually when you see jumping spiders.
They're really full of personality actually.
Yeah. Connor, aged 8, asks, "Why are butterfly wings so delicate, and what are they made of?"
So this is quite a tricky question, this one. So the outside of an insect is called a cuticle. That's its kind of skin. And because insects have got their skins on the outside, exoskeleton, their skeleton on the outside, exoskeletons, they're quite tough, and that protects the whole insect. And the wings are actually just a part of that. They're a projection out from the body of the insect. What the insects, of course, do, what butterflies do, is they'll pump out those wings as they emerge from the pupae as adults, and then they'll dry. And they'll have a series of veins which kind of hold the support of these things, as you can see. On the surface of insects, there's lots of hairs, and that's true for the surface of the butterfly's wings as well, except those hairs are very flattened, so we call them scales, and that's what gives butterfly wings their colour. So if you look at a butterfly wing under a microscope, it's a fantastic range of little coloured scales all over it, which make up the complex patterns of butterflies. Actually, I can, it won't probably show, but I've got a butterfly from the museum here, a very old one. There's a green veined white. So all of the different markings you can see on the green veined white here, the kind of the black and the veins and everything like that, are all made up by masses of scales, which may look like a constant colour. They're actually just lots and lots of little individual scales coloured to make that wonderful pattern.
Oh, fantastic. So Thomas, aged 8, asks, "What is the mini beast that surprised you the most?" Have you got a surprising mini beast?
So it's actually a little bit like it's not quite like a Darwin story. There's a famous Darwin story about this. The mini beast that surprised me the most was in Malaysia, which is a type of ground beetle, and it does a very similar thing to a type of ground beetle we've got in the UK called a bombardier beetle. And what this does is it when it's threatened, it produces these chemicals from its rear end, which when they react together make a really horrible smell, and also are very hot. They react to produce heat. And I found a ground beetle when I was in Malaysia on fieldwork, and which just looked like a regular ground beetle. I didn't realise it'd do this. I wouldn't pick up a bombardier beetle in the UK because I'm aware it's able to do that, but I wasn't aware of that in these Malaysian ones. So I picked it up as normal with my hand, and then it burned my hand quite badly, and it ended up with a stain on my hand for about 2 months.
Oh God.
So that will teach me to be more careful. So that's probably the mini beast that surprised me the most.
Yeah, that sounds very. I'd be very surprised if something did that to me.
I was surprised.
Would you be able to catch a worm in your pitfall traps?
Very definitely. Yeah, lots and lots of worms in pitfall traps. There's a whole group of worms that basically live on the surface of the soil rather than in the soil. And when it's wetter, lots of the soil-dwelling worms move up and kind of like move along the surface. They can move around when it's wetter. So with the rain that's coming this weekend and things like that, if you get out in your garden even at night time, like see worms sometimes moving around, certainly you'll find them in your pitfall traps.
Okay. So Vicky Gilbert is asking, is there a place where we can record what we find?
We've got the iRecord we've been using all this week. I think there's fantastic instructions online from Matt Hayes which you can follow to upload all your records onto iRecord. This is a really, really nice way of making sure that your records are taken into account nationally. So people all over the country are recording these insects, and particularly this week, and actually also throughout the year. And these are the kind of records that are really important for us because they give a snapshot of what wildlife's like in the UK. And that includes bigger things, but it also goes all the way down to insects, arguably the most important group.
Yeah, of course. This is a question relating back to something you mentioned on Monday when we were with you. And you said about catching glowworms. So we've been asked, did you catch the glowworms in a cave or cavern? Because isn't that their natural nesting place?
So there's lots and lots of different species of glowworms or other, these are beetles, they're a misnomer calling them worms. They're a type of beetle, a big family of beetles. They're able to produce light, and they often use them to signal between males and females. In the UK, we've got one species of glowworm, where the female is the one that produces the light, and they tend to live on what are called unimproved grassland, which basically means grassland that hasn't had fertiliser put on it. And it's very often they're calcareous, so chalk grasslands and limestone grasslands. These are fantastic places for wildlife generally. You've got loads of specialist butterflies living on them, loads of beetles, including wonderful glowworms. So where I saw them was mostly night surveys on chalk grassland sites around Cambridge and also in Bedfordshire. And there's some really fantastic places where you can go and see glowworms. And what happens is the females are sort of signalling to the males. And what they do is they crawl up grass stems. So they're about yay high off the ground, sometimes a little bit more. And they'll curl up, and then the tail, the very tip of the tail, is where they produce this kind of greeny yellow light. And they'll tip the end of their tail up, and then they'll start producing the light. And so when you see them, you'll be walking along the grass, and if you've got a torch, of course, you tend to carry a torch at night because you can see. Now, I'm sometimes out at night time because there's lots of caterpillars that come out at night, and so we do nocturnal surveys for caterpillars. So I wasn't particularly searching for glowworms, but you see glowworms at the same time. And when you turn off your torch, obviously your eyes adjust, and suddenly you can see these little pinpricks of light all over the chalk grassland. When you get closer, you realise they're glowworms. They're really, really beautiful. And they're quite unusual. Again, they look a little bit like that rove beetle we saw earlier, in that they've really got no wing cases at all. So they look very different from a normal beetle. Magical things.
Yeah, it sounds it. So another question. Why are some animals researched more than others? I think this is quite an interesting one.
That's a really, really good question. I think there's probably about 3 answers to that, and they're all true. So there's different reasons for it. I think one is because some insects are more popular. So the butterflies that we had a look at just now are a really popular group of insects. People really like them, and therefore people like to work on them and like to study them. So I think there is just a choice of things. They're there, and people have maybe known them since they were children. Scientists have known since they were children, and they're just really interested in them. But that kind of feeds on to a second point, which is that when you know a group well, when butterflies, for example, have been very well studied in the UK, It means that if you find out a bit more about them, it kind of adds to a body of knowledge, so you can gain a much deeper understanding. And for things like butterflies, that can be really important, because we know a lot about where they were found, not just 10 years ago, but 20 years ago, 50 years ago, even 200 years ago. There's records, written records and specimens in museums going back all that time. So that means that finding out stuff about butterflies now can tell you things about how butterflies have changed over time, but they can also be used as an indicator of how the whole environment has changed. The third answer is a little bit to do with how well studied they are as well, and that's to do with model organisms. So very often in biology there are certain organisms which are called model organisms because they're ones that people study in a great deal of detail to find out general principles in biology. And in insects, the most well known, the most studied are fruit flies, Drosophila. That's how we've learned an awful lot about how insects actually develop their body plans and things like that, really complex work.
Yeah, so yeah, interesting, different ways of thinking about that. It's really fascinating. Timothy, aged 8, asks, what is the most common thing you catch in your pitfall traps?
So I mean, it depends very much where you set your pitfall trap. But very often it's something people won't even notice when they set their pitfall trap, and that was something called springtails. Colembula is their proper name. And these are little things which are they're six-legged, but they're not quite insects. They're a group that in evolution branched off from insects very early on. They've never had wings. They're very, very simple. They look a bit like tiny rove beetles, but they're very pale. And these are incredibly numerous in the soil and in the soil surface. So you can get hundreds of thousands of these just in a square metre of soil. They're really, really numerous. Of course, they're also tiny. So a lot of these will be less than a millimetre long. And so in terms of the pitfall traps, if you look really carefully, they're often the most numerous thing, even though you might miss them. They're called springtails. They've got this fantastic device, which is called a furcula, which is basically a kind of projection off their tail. Imagine I can sort of show you my... trying to make sure I can get there. We go. This is my tail of my colembula, and this is my furcula. And it's like a little fork device, so it sort of looks like that on the end. And what they'll basically do is they can pull it down, and what they're doing is they're kind of building up tension. Looks like I'm just trying to show you how strong I am, but not. So build up tension, and then it kind of locks in place. So when you see a springtail walking around, they'll have this device locked underneath them. You won't even see it. But if they're scared, if a predator or a rove beetle or something like that tries to attack them, what they can do is they can just release it. So they're going to release the little catch here, and it goes, and what it does is it shoots the springtail up into the air. They seem to have very little control over where they go, but it's a good way of getting out of trouble immediately.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Very, very interesting. Really good sort of adaptations that we see in these little animals as well.
Yeah, all of these things will have different adaptations to help them survive and to reproduce.
Yeah. Noah, age 6, says, I found a really tiny snail shell about 1 to 2 millimetres in my pitfall trap. How do I know if the snail is still in there and what sort it is, and can I keep it?
That's a very good question. That's more one for Richard Priest than for me, really. So often, when snails are very tiny, the shells are almost see-through. So you might be able to actually see the snail in there if you look very carefully. So even tiny snails, what you'll see is they'll retreat down into the shell, right into the kind of deep bit, if you like. So if the snail's in there, you'll often see, if you hold it up to the light really, really carefully, you might be able to see it going suddenly darker partway through. That will often be the middle bit of the shell. And that will be the body of the snail, which is actually in there, kind of tucked down and waiting for it to get moisture. One thing you can do, of course, to get them out is you could put them in a little tray with a bit of damp tissue paper in the bottom and leave it for a little while, and that'll basically trick the snail into thinking that it's rained, it's wetter, and it might be able to start moving again. And if it does that, of course, you can tell it's still in there. I think snails are a great thing to keep. So they're some lot of the species are quite easy to keep. It depends a bit what you've got, but give it a go. I mean, sort of a little bit of soil, and we call the proper name for this is a vivarium. So you can make yourself a vivarium with some soil and some plants and things like that, and see how your snail gets on. Make sure you do air holes as well.
Yeah. And Ethan, age 10, how far do beetles travel to find water?
So most beetles won't. I mean, insects will drink, but they won't usually go to water to drink or anything like that. Because if you imagine, even on a dry night, if you go out early in the morning, if you feel the grass, it's damp. And that's all the dew that's formed on the grass, so water droplets forming on the grass over at night time. And of course, that's plenty of drinking for insects. So a lot of insects just drink when it rains or on tips of grass and things like that as they're moving around. So they won't need to travel to water. A lot of them can do much better than that. They won't need to drink at all. They'll get all the moisture they need from their food. But they won't need to travel for that. Of course, there are some insects which are specialist to water. So for beetles, things like diving beetles are a very good example. And in that case, the adults and the larvae both live most of the time in water, and the adults can fly like lots of beetles can. And in that case, they can travel huge distances. I mean, kilometres and kilometres, really massive distances, to travel from one pond to another.
Yeah, fantastic. And one last question. What would your top tip be for encouraging the wildlife in your garden, do you think?
So it's really the easiest thing is to not be so tidy. That's the trick for insects. So if you can, avoid cutting your lawn so much. Don't clean up quite as much. Have a wildlife patch. I mean, it doesn't have to be, your whole garden doesn't have to be overrun with weeds or anything like that. Depends on what people feel about their gardens. But having a strip of long grass, not tidying your borders quite much, being a bit more less rigid with what you define as weeds as well. I think a lot of weeds in borders can look rather nice. So again, just change our ways we think about that, because of course these are providing resources for loads of insects. They're really, really important. Of course, in a more specific sense than just being less tidy, you can bring in things that really encourage wildlife. And we've been seeing your wonderful podcast all this last few months. Ponds, of course, fantastic way of bringing wildlife into gardens, really, really important. Wood piles, brilliant for lots of wildlife. You get lots of these decomposer insects in there feeding away. And also, of course, it provides a food resource, a larder for lots of birds and things like that. And planting maybe more native species is also good. From the pollinator point of view, having open flowers and making sure you've got flowers throughout the year will encourage in a huge range of bees and butterflies. And this really makes a difference. If you do this, you'll notice a difference with insects almost immediately. So it's well worth doing. You get the reward very quickly.
Yeah. I'm going to squeeze in one last audience question that's just come through. What do you think about breeding UK natives butterflies from caterpillars and releasing them to the wild?
So I think in general, keeping caterpillars is fantastic for especially if you've got children. And it's fantastic for anyone. It's a fascinating thing to do. And seeing an egg move towards a caterpillar and then turn into a pupa and emerge as an adult, it's a fantastic thing, and it's a miracle. So I'm definitely in favour of that. If you can, don't release these things into the wild afterwards if you've bought them, because they'll be from various different areas. They'll be from different stock. It's not a good idea to just start releasing stuff. So choose the species that you go for. If you've got ones that you've collected from your garden, so cabbage whites, so small whites, large whites, which live on your cabbages, you can easily find those eggs at this time of the year, and raising those and re-release them afterwards, no problem at all. But don't re-release things that you've brought in or things that you've moved about.
Good tips there. I think it's amazing the way that caterpillars become butterflies. It's just extraordinary. So thank you so much for joining us, Ed. And it's been really interesting hearing all about minibeasts and the stuff that might go unseen, ways of looking at the things that we might not normally see.
That's been an absolute pleasure. Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye. So thank you again for some really brilliant questions then. And do join us for our next session at 1 o'clock when we'll be beak netting with Matt Hayes to look for some of the insects that are living in the trees in his garden.